Commander Isabella Rivers stood at the Pentagon's command center, watching as time itself fractured across the globe. The holographic display showed temporal distortions spreading like spider webs across major cities: London, Tokyo, New Delhi, Sao Paulo, all experiencing the same phenomenon. Time wasn't just moving differently, it was being weaponized. The aliens called themselves the Chronoshi, and they had arrived 3 days ago in ships that seemed to phase in and out of existence. Their message was simple: Earth would be integrated into their temporal empire, whether humanity consented or not. They demonstrated their power by making entire city blocks experience a week in the span of an hour, while others were frozen in moments that stretched for days. "Status report," Isabella commanded, her voice steadied despite the chaos unfolding before her. Lieutenant James Harrison, her temporal analytics expert, looked up from his console with dark circles under his eyes. "The Chronoshi are establishing temporal manipulation fields around major population centers," he reported. "But, Commander, there's something odd about the data. The effects aren't consistent. Some areas are barely affected, while others are completely destabilized." Isabella leaned over his shoulder, studying the readings. The temporal waves should have been uniform, yet they showed strange fluctuations. "Explain." "It's like..." Harrison paused, searching for words. "It's like trying to freeze a river. Some parts crystallize instantly, but others keep flowing, almost randomly. And here's the weird part. The resistance seems strongest in the most chaotic areas of human activity." Dr. Priya Patel, the team's quantum physicist, rushed into the command center, clutching a tablet. "Commander, I've identified a pattern." Her usual composed demeanor was replaced with barely contained excitement. "The Chronoshi's temporal technology, it relies on predictability. It needs ordered systems to function effectively." Isabella's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "And human behavior is inherently unpredictable," Priya finished, "especially in groups. Our tendency to procrastinate, our ability to adapt to delays, our random decision-making. It's all acting as a natural defense against their temporal manipulation." The revelation hit Isabella like a thunderbolt. Humanity's seemingly chaotic nature, our tendency to run late, change plans last minute, and adapt to unexpected situations. Traits the Chronoshi probably saw as primitive, were actually protecting us. "Show me the least affected areas," Isabella commanded. Harrison quickly pulled up a new map. Sure enough, the regions showing the strongest resistance to temporal manipulation corresponded with the most dynamic human activities: busy markets, entertainment districts, transportation hubs. "They chose Earth because they thought we were temporally primitive," Isabella mused, a plan forming in her mind. "But they don't understand that our relationship with time isn't a weakness. It's an evolutionary advantage." The command center's alert system suddenly blared. A Chronoshi ship had appeared directly over Washington, D.C., its crystalline structure distorting the very air around it. The alien voice that filled the room seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Your resistance is causing temporal instability," the voice announced. "Submit to temporal regularization, or face chronodeletion." Isabella straightened her uniform and pressed the communication button. "This is Commander Isabella Rivers of Earth's Temporal Defense Initiative. Your attempt to regulate human time has failed. Perhaps we should discuss why." There was a pause, a moment that seemed to stretch longer than it should. The aliens hadn't expected this level of coherence from a species they considered temporally primitive. "You cannot resist standardization," the voice insisted. "Your species' temporal chaos threatens the fabric of our empire." Isabella allowed herself a small smile. "That chaos you're so afraid of. It's not a flaw in our species. It's a feature, and you've just shown us how to weaponize it." She turned to her team, determination burning in her eyes. "Contact every major city. Tell them to increase irregular activities, change schedules, reroute traffic, encourage spontaneous events. Let's show these aliens why humanity's mastery of chaos is more powerful than their control of time." As her orders went out, the temporal distortion fields began to fluctuate wildly. The Chronoshi hadn't just awakened a sleeping giant. They'd awakened one that thrived on the very chaos they sought to eliminate. "And get me the president," Isabella added, watching as the first Chronoshi ship's temporal field began to destabilize. "Tell him I know how to win this war. We're going to need every procrastinator, every schedule shifter, and every spontaneous soul on Earth. It's time to show the Chronoshi why humanity's temporal weaknesses are actually our greatest strength." The streets of New York City had never been more chaotic, and that was exactly the point. Commander Isabella Rivers watched from a temporary command post as flash mobs erupted spontaneously across Times Square. Food trucks changed locations at random, and street performers switched corners without warning. Every unpredictable action sent ripples through the Chronoshi's temporal control field, weakening their grip on the city. "Status report on Operation Chaos," she called out to Lieutenant Harrison, who was coordinating with other major cities worldwide. "Better than we could have hoped, Commander," he replied, excitement evident in his voice. "Mumbai's rickshaw drivers are deliberately taking random routes. Tokyo's commuters are ignoring train schedules, and Rio's street festivals are popping up without warning. The Chronoshi's temporal fields are destabilizing everywhere." Dr. Priya Patel approached with new data scrolling across her tablet. "The science behind this is fascinating, Commander. The Chronoshi's temporal technology requires predictable patterns to establish control points. But human behavior," she smiled, "especially deliberate randomness, creates what I'm calling temporal static." Isabella studied the readings. The Chronoshi ships hovering above major cities were struggling to maintain their temporal manipulation fields. Their crystalline structures flickered erratically, like machines being fed corrupt data. They thought they could force humanity to conform to their rigid temporal standards, Isabella mused. Instead, they've discovered that our greatest defense is our natural resistance to conformity. The command post's screen suddenly flickered, and the familiar otherworldly voice of the Chronoshi filled the room. "Your species' temporal sabotage must cease. You are corrupting the grand design of universal time standardization." Isabella squared her shoulders. "Your grand design failed to account for human nature. We've spent millennia adapting to delays, changes, and chaos. Did you really think you could simply reprogram that out of us?" The response came with an edge of frustration. "Your temporal patterns are an aberration. A species that cannot maintain chronological discipline cannot be allowed to influence the cosmic order." "Influence it?" Isabella laughed. "We're about to revolutionize it." She turned to Dr. Patel. "Show me the latest results from Project Tempest." Priya pulled up a new set of data. The project had been launched in secret as soon as they discovered humanity's natural temporal resistance. Scientists worldwide had been studying how human unpredictability could be harnessed and amplified. "We've identified specific human behaviors that generate the strongest temporal disruptions," Priya explained. "Last-minute decision changes, spontaneous gatherings, even our tendency to hit the snooze button. They all create micro-tears in their temporal control fields. But here's the breakthrough. We can amplify these effects." Lieutenant Harrison added, "We're seeing the strongest disruptions in places where people are deliberately embracing chaos. Flash mobs in Berlin, impromptu street parties in Barcelona, spontaneous parades in Mexico City. Every random human moment is like static in their temporal signal." Isabella nodded, a plan crystallizing in her mind. "Then it's time to take it to the next level. Contact all major cities. Tell them to implement Protocol Pandemonium." The order went out, and within hours, humanity's organized chaos reached new heights. Traffic patterns were randomized. Public transportation abandoned fixed schedules, and people everywhere were encouraged to embrace their most spontaneous impulses. The result was a cascading wave of temporal disruption that the Chronoshi couldn't counter. Above New York, the massive Chronoshi ship began to shimmer more violently, its temporal field collapsing under the weight of millions of unpredictable human moments. Similar reports came in from around the globe. Humanity's deliberate chaos was overwhelming the aliens' rigid systems. "Commander," Harrison called out urgently, "we're detecting massive energy fluctuations in the Chronoshi ships. They're trying to increase power to their temporal fields." But the sky above Times Square suddenly lit up as the Chronoshi vessel's temporal field imploded, creating a spectacular display of chronological backwash. The ship itself remained, but its ability to manipulate time had been neutralized. "They never understood," Isabella said, watching as similar scenes played out above cities worldwide. "Time isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be experienced, in all its messy, unpredictable glory." And humanity. "We're masters of making the most of temporal chaos." But even as her team celebrated this victory, Isabella knew this was just the beginning. The Chronoshi wouldn't give up easily, and humanity's newfound temporal resistance was still in its infancy. They needed to move quickly to develop this natural advantage into something more, a defense that could protect Earth permanently from those who would impose their rigid order on human time. "Dr. Patel," she called out, "gather every physicist, engineer, and theoretical scientist you can find. It's time to turn our temporal chaos into a science." The Chronoshi thought they could teach humanity to obey time's rules. Instead, we're going to rewrite them. The battle for Earth's temporal sovereignty had entered a new phase, and humanity's perceived weaknesses were proving to be their greatest weapons. The question now was, could they develop these natural defenses into something more before the Chronoshi returned with new methods of temporal control? Isabella looked at the data streaming across her screens, showing humanity's spontaneous resistance growing stronger by the hour. For the first time since the invasion began, she allowed herself to feel real hope. The Chronoshi had wanted to impose order on human chaos. Instead, they'd taught humanity how to weaponize it. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that technically didn't exist on any timeline, Project Chronoshield was taking shape. Commander Isabella Rivers walked through the Temporal Research Lab, where the brightest minds on Earth were turning humanity's chaotic nature into a scientific breakthrough. Dr. Priya Patel stood before a massive holographic display showing what looked like a double helix made of time itself. "Commander, you need to see this," she said, manipulating the image with practiced gestures. "We've mapped the temporal resistance patterns in human behavior. It's not just random chaos. There's an underlying structure to our unpredictability." The display zoomed in to show intricate patterns within patterns, each representing different aspects of human temporal behavior. Every time someone decides to take a spontaneous detour, hit snooze, or change plans last minute, they create what we're calling temporal ripples. Priya explained. "Individually, they're tiny, but collectively, they become a shield." Isabella finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Exactly. And we found a way to amplify it." At a nearby testing chamber, Lieutenant Harrison was coordinating with a team of engineers. They had constructed what looked like a massive tuning fork, but instead of sound, it resonated with temporal energy. "The temporal amplification array," Harrison explained as Isabella approached. "It takes our natural temporal resistance and magnifies it exponentially. Watch this." He activated the device. The air within the chamber seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. A holographic clock on the wall began to run erratically, forward, backward, sideways, before stabilizing in a state of controlled chaos. "We're not just defending against their temporal manipulation anymore," Harrison said proudly. "We're learning to manipulate it ourselves, but in our own uniquely human way." Isabella studied the readings. "How soon can we scale this up?" "That's the beautiful part," Priya interjected. "We don't need massive installations. We can build smaller versions, network them together, and let them feed off the natural temporal disruptions humans create. The more people go about their unpredictable daily lives, the stronger the field becomes." The facility's alert system suddenly blared. A junior officer rushed in with a tablet. "Commander, we're detecting temporal distortions in orbit. The Chronoshi. They're back. But different this time." The main screen activated to show several Chronoshi ships, but these were unlike their previous vessels. These were darker, more angular, designed for war rather than temporal manipulation. "They've adapted," Isabella muttered. "They realize they can't simply impose their temporal order on us. Now they're planning to remove our chaos permanently." The alien transmission that followed confirmed her fears. "Your species has demonstrated an unacceptable level of temporal corruption," the Chronoshi declared. "You leave us no choice but to implement chronological purification protocols." Isabella turned to her team. "How close are we to full deployment of the Chronoshield?" "The network is at 60% coverage," Harrison reported. "We need another 48 hours for full global protection." "We don't have 48 hours, Isabella said, watching as the Chronoshi ships moved into attack formation. "Dr. Patel, can we bootstrap the system? Use what we have to protect our most populous areas while we complete the network?" Priya's fingers flew over her console. "Yes, but it'll be risky. We'll need to channel even more temporal chaos than we planned. The system might not be able to handle it." Just like a human to procrastinate until the last minute, a smile tugged at Isabella's lips. "Good thing we're experts at that. Send the order. I want every human on Earth to embrace their most spontaneous impulses. Tell them to take random routes to work, change their schedules, make unexpected decisions. The more unpredictable we are, the stronger our defense will be." As the orders went out, the facility hummed with increasing energy. Screens showed temporal disruption levels rising worldwide as humanity collectively embraced its chaotic nature. The Chronoshield network, though incomplete, began to pulse with power. "Chronoshi ships entering upper atmosphere," Harrison reported. "They're charging weapons." "Activate the shield," Isabella commanded. "Let's show them what organized chaos looks like." The temporal amplification arrays worldwide activated simultaneously, creating a cascading wave of controlled temporal chaos. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The Chronoshi weapons, designed to operate in strictly ordered time, couldn't penetrate the field of human-generated temporal static. But they weren't done. The alien ships began to pulse with a new kind of energy, an attempt to impose absolute order on Earth's time stream. It was their most powerful weapon, designed to freeze Earth in a single, eternally regulated moment. What happened next would be studied by temporal physicists for generations. As the Chronoshi's temporal stasis field met humanity's chaos shield, something unprecedented occurred. The two forces didn't just clash. They began to dance, creating patterns of time that had never been seen before. "The readings are off the scale," Priya shouted, her eyes wide with wonder. "The shield isn't just blocking their attack, it's learning from it. Our temporal chaos is actually incorporating their order into its pattern, making itself stronger." Isabella watched in amazement as the Chronoshield grew more powerful with each passing second. The very unpredictability they had feared was now Earth's greatest defense, and it was evolving faster than the Chronoshi could adapt. "Send word to all stations," she ordered, a fierce pride in her voice. "Tell everyone to keep doing what humans do best, being gloriously, unpredictably human. Our greatest weakness has become our greatest strength, and it's time to show the Chronoshi exactly what that means." The battle for Earth's temporal sovereignty had entered its final phase, and humanity's chaotic nature was proving to be more powerful than anyone, human or alien, had ever imagined. The Temporal Defense Initiative's command center thrummed with energy as Commander Isabella Rivers initiated humanity's first temporal offensive. After weeks of defending against Chronoshi attacks, they were finally ready to take the fight to the enemy. "Project Chaos Wave is ready for deployment," Lieutenant Harrison announced, his hands steady on the temporal controls despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. "All major population centers report maximum unpredictability levels." The holographic display showed Earth wrapped in a shimmering field of temporal energy, each flicker representing millions of humans deliberately embracing their most spontaneous instincts. But now, instead of using this energy purely for defense, they had learned to focus it into something more. Dr. Priya Patil monitored the readings with intense concentration. "The temporal compression is stable, Commander. We're ready to launch Operation Butterfly Effect." Isabella nodded, remembering how they'd discovered this capability. It had started as an accident, a moment when the chronoshield had not just deflected a Chronotia attack, but had somehow absorbed and redirected it. That discovery had led to weeks of frantic research and development, resulting in humanity's first temporal weapon. "Begin the sequence," Isabella ordered. "Let's show the Chronoshi what happens when you push humanity too far." Around the globe, thousands of temporal amplification arrays shifted frequency. Instead of generating protective chaos, they now focused humanity's natural temporal disruption into a concentrated wave. The effect was like a tsunami made of time itself, a massive surge of controlled chaos aimed directly at the Chronoshi fleet. The alien ships detected the attack too late. Their rigid temporal systems, designed to impose order, couldn't adapt quickly enough to the rapidly shifting patterns of human-generated chaos. The first wave hit their fleet like a hammer striking crystal. "Direct hit," Harrison called out. "Their temporal fields are destabilizing. 3 ships already showing critical fluctuations." On the main screen, several Chronoshi vessels began to phase in and out of normal spacetime, their crews experiencing thousands of moments simultaneously as their temporal control systems failed. It was a devastating demonstration of humanity's new capabilities. The Chronoshi response was immediate and desperate. "This violation of temporal law cannot be permitted," their message boomed through the command center. "Your species must be chronologically reset." Isabella watched as the alien fleet regrouped, their ships forming a complex geometric pattern. "They're preparing their mass synchronization cannon," Priya warned. "If it hits, it could force all of Earth into perfect temporal alignment." "Perfect for them, maybe," Isabella said with a grim smile. "But we've learned something they haven't. Chaos isn't our weakness. It's our evolution." She turned to her team. "Initiate Protocol Pandemonium Prime." This was their master stroke, the culmination of everything they'd learned about temporal manipulation. Instead of fighting chaos, they had learned to ride it like a wave. Every human on Earth had been briefed for this moment, ready to create the largest synchronized act of random behavior in history. "All sectors reporting ready," Harrison confirmed. "Waiting for your mark." Isabella took a deep breath. "Send the signal. Let chaos reign." At that moment, billions of humans simultaneously did something unexpected. They changed plans, took different routes, made spontaneous decisions, all at once, but all in different ways. The resulting temporal disruption was beyond anything their instruments could measure. The effect on the Chronoshi fleet was catastrophic. Their mass synchronization cannon, designed to impose perfect order, instead acted as a focus point for humanity's chaos wave. The weapon backfired spectacularly, shattering their carefully maintained temporal fields. "Their fleet is losing cohesion," Priya reported, wonder in her voice. "The temporal feedback is forcing them to experience every possible timeline simultaneously. They can't maintain temporal stability." One by one, the Chronoshi ships began to dissolve from their rigid time-space coordinates. Their perfect order had become their perfect vulnerability, unable to handle the infinite possibilities the human chaos had unleashed. The alien commander's final transmission was filled with disbelief. "Impossible. How can you control such chaos?" "That's the point," Isabella responded, watching as the last Chronoshi ship disappeared into temporal static. "We don't control it. We embrace it. That's what makes us human." As the dust settled, the implications of their victory became clear. Humanity hadn't just defended itself. It had discovered a new aspect of its own nature. Their temporal chaos wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a fundamental part of their species' strength. "Beginning fleet-wide temporal scans," Harrison announced. "No sign of the Chronoshi in any accessible timeline." Isabella nodded, but she knew this wasn't the end. The Chronoshi would be back, perhaps with new weapons and strategies. But humanity would be ready, and they would be stronger. They had learned to harness their chaos, to turn their unpredictability into a force that could reshape time itself. "Send word to all stations," she ordered. "Tell them to maintain temporal awareness, but resume normal operations." And by normal, she added with a smile, I mean as chaotic and unpredictable as humans naturally are. The command center erupted in cheers, but Isabella's mind was already turning to the future. They had won this battle by embracing who they truly were. The question now was, what else could humanity achieve now that they had learned to harness the power of their own chaos? 1 year after humanity's victory over the Chronoshi fleet, the Temporal Defense Initiative had evolved into something its founders could never have imagined. Commander Isabella Rivers stood in the newly constructed Global Temporal Observatory, watching as streams of temporal data flowed across holographic displays like rivers of light. "The latest readings from the Chaos Network are fascinating," Dr. Priya Patel said, manipulating a complex temporal visualization. "We're not just defending against temporal manipulation anymore. We're actually starting to understand the fundamental nature of time itself." The visualization showed Earth wrapped in an ever-shifting web of temporal energy, each strand representing the collective unpredictability of human behavior. What had started as a defensive measure against the Chronoshi had become a new branch of human science. Temporal dynamics. "Show me the anomaly readings," Isabella requested, referring to the strange temporal signatures they'd been detecting at the edge of the solar system. Lieutenant Harrison brought up the data. "They're getting stronger, Commander. Whatever's coming, it's bigger than the Chronoshi." The readings showed massive distortions in spacetime, far more sophisticated than anything they'd encountered before. The Chronoshi, it seemed, had been merely the vanguard of a larger force, the Temporal Consortium, an alliance of species dedicated to imposing temporal order across the galaxy. "They still don't understand," Isabella mused, studying the approaching signatures. "They think they can perfect the universe by regulating time itself. But perfection isn't what makes the universe beautiful, chaos is." As if in response to her words, the observatory's deep space sensors suddenly blazed with activity. A massive fleet of ships had emerged from temporal fold space, vessels of various designs, all sharing the same crystalline architecture that marked them as temporal manipulators. The message that followed was transmitted simultaneously across all temporal frequencies. "Species of Earth, your temporal rebellion has drawn the attention of the consortium. Your chaotic nature threatens the grand design. Submit to temporal standardization, or face extinction." Isabella exchanged looks with her team. They had prepared for this moment, knowing the Chronoshi defeat would attract greater attention. But what the consortium didn't know was that humanity had spent the past year not just defending against temporal manipulation, but mastering it in their own unique way. "Dr. Patel, initiate the Temporal Symphony Protocol," Isabella commanded. Priya's fingers danced across her console, activating the global network of temporal sensors and amplifiers they had constructed. But unlike the rigid control systems of the consortium, Earth's temporal technology was built to harness chaos rather than suppress it. "All temporal nodes responding," Harrison reported. "The symphony is building." Across the planet, billions of humans went about their lives, each random decision and spontaneous action contributing to a growing wave of temporal energy. But now, guided by the Symphony Protocol, this chaos wasn't just defensive. It was becoming something new, something the universe had never seen before. The consortium fleet moved into attack position, their weapons charging with enough temporal energy to freeze Earth in a single eternal moment. But as they prepared to fire, something unexpected happened. "They're detecting the symphony," Priya announced, excitement in her voice. "Their temporal sensors are trying to make sense of our patterns, but they can't because there are no patterns, just infinite possibility." Isabella watched as the consortium fleet's formation began to waver. Their rigid temporal technology, designed to impose order, couldn't cope with the beautiful chaos that humanity had learned to embrace. "Send our response," Isabella ordered. Her message was brief. "You seek to perfect time by controlling it. We've learned to perfect it by setting it free." At her signal, the temporal symphony reached its crescendo. Every human on Earth, whether they knew it or not, was contributing to a massive temporal event. Their collective chaos, their endless capacity for random choice and spontaneous action, created something that defied the very laws the consortium sought to enforce. The effect was beyond anything they had achieved against the Chronoshi. The consortium fleet's temporal fields didn't just fail. They transformed. Ships designed to impose order found themselves caught in a dance of infinite possibility, their crews experiencing a revelation that shook their fundamental understanding of time itself. "Commander," Harrison called out, "we're receiving transmissions from individual ships in the fleet. They're asking questions. Their crews are experiencing temporal awakening." Isabella smiled. This was what they had hoped for, not just victory, but understanding. The consortium was experiencing firsthand what humanity had discovered, that true temporal mastery came not from controlling time, but from dancing with it. One by one, the consortium ships powered down their temporal weapons. The fleet's command ship transmitted a final message. "We have existed for millennia, believing we understood time. In a single day, your species has shown us how little we knew. We request dialogue." "Now that," Isabella said, "is what I call perfect timing." In the years that followed, Earth became not just a temporal anomaly to be feared, but a center of temporal innovation. The Chaos Network expanded into a galaxy-wide temporal communication system, allowing species to share not just information, but entire new ways of experiencing time itself. Humanity had not just survived an attempt to regulate their temporal nature, they had transformed it into a gift for the entire galaxy. Their temporal corruption, as the Chronoshi had called it, became known across the cosmos as temporal art, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in the universe are the ones that can never be perfectly controlled. Isabella Rivers stood at her favorite observation window, watching Earth's temporal field shimmer with countless possibilities. They had done more than master time. They had freed it, and in doing so, had freed themselves. "Ready for the next temporal anomaly?" Harrison asked, joining her at the window. "Always," she replied with a smile. "After all, being ready for anything while planning for nothing. That's the human way." The end.